Before we show you how to take basic pictures and preview those pictures, let's take a look at the kind of information you can find on the control panel. The control panel is designed to be your one-stop viewing location for virtually all information about your current camera settings and status. Categories of information include these: shutter speed, aperture, exposure compensation, ISO sensitivity, white balance presets and color temperature, exposure mode indicator, image size and file type being used, focus area selected, number of exposures remaining, battery indicator, and literally dozens of other useful categories of information. Before we spend any more time talking about the camera, let's show you how you can actually use it for taking and previewing pictures. Before you can operate your camera, you'll need to charge the battery, mount a lens, and insert a CF card. Use your remote to skip the next 3 sections if you already know how to do these basic activities. To charge your battery, insert it into the charger like this, then plug the charger into the wall jack. Tip: it takes about 3 hours to fully charge your battery. Another tip: your battery will allow you to take about 600 pictures. To insert your charged battery, simply open the battery compartment and slide the battery into position like this. Note: always power off your camera before inserting or replacing a battery or memory card. One more tip about your battery: if you're shooting in cold weather, to hold its charge longer, put it in your pocket to keep it warm. To mount or install a lens, make sure that the camera is switched to off. Then hold the camera in one hand and the lens in the other like this. Then line up the mounting index on the camera with that on the lens. Then insert the lens into the camera and turn it gently counterclockwise until it clicks. Do not depress the lens release button. Caution: take great care not to scratch the lens by allowing it to make contact with anything. To dismount a lens, be sure that the power is off, then press the lens release button while holding the camera with the same hand. Then with the other hand, rotate the lens clockwise until it uncouples. To insert your memory card, simply open the memory card slot and insert the card like this. Do not force the card. If it's not positioned correctly, forcing the card can cause damage to the camera and the card. Your camera uses either Type 1 or Type 2 compact flash memory cards. These cards are available in varying sizes from 32 megabytes to 8 gigabytes or more from third-party providers. The larger the card's memory capacity, the more images you'll be able to store before either deleting or copying the images to another device, like your PC's hard drive. Another tip: when your camera is off and a battery is charged and inserted, the number of remaining photos will show on your control panel. If the number is larger than 999, it will be abbreviated as follows: 1.2K for 1200, 2.5K for 2500, and so on. Another tip: your camera will operate faster if you periodically reformat your memory card rather than simply deleting images from it to free space for more picture taking. Caution: don't reformat your card unless you've already copied the images to another device. Reformatting your card will erase all the images. To format your memory card, press both format buttons simultaneously. When you see the 4 appear in the control panel, press both format buttons again. Now that your battery, lens, and memory cards are installed, you're ready to take your first picture. Allow us to show you how to configure your camera for basic shooting in programmed auto mode. Once you've set the camera as we've described, you'll be able to take pictures simply by aiming the camera and pressing the shutter button. Here's how you set up your camera for basic picture taking. Remove the lens cap and push the power switch to on. Then, press the exposure mode button while turning the main command dial until the P, or programmed auto mode, is selected. Press the mode dial lock release while turning the mode dial until the S, for single frame, is selected. Rotate the AF area mode selector until it clicks into place, pointing to this icon. At this setting, the camera will focus on the subject in the focus area selected by you. Rotate the focus mode selector to S for single servo. Set the focus mode switch on your lens to MA. Now rotate your metering selector to matrix metering. This uses information from all areas of the frame to determine exposure. Your camera is now fully configured for picture taking in auto-programmed mode, with the various focus, exposure, and shutter mode preferences indicated. Simply aim your camera, look through the viewfinder, and make sure that the center focus point is over the subject that you want in focus. Press the shutter halfway down until a beep sound is heard and a focus indicator glows within the viewfinder. This indicates that focus has been achieved. These also indicate that exposure has been set. You can check the exposure settings, shutter speed, and aperture in the viewfinder before depressing the shutter button the rest of the way. Then press the shutter the rest of the way down to take a picture. Practice taking pictures in the programmed auto configuration to get a general feel for using your camera. Please be aware, if the viewfinder indicates high, the picture will be overexposed. Use a neutral density filter to reduce the brightness. If the indicator shows low, the picture will be underexposed. Use a flash or higher ISO setting to accommodate the exposure needs, as will be discussed later. Caution: when the memory card access lamp is illuminated, the image is still being written to your CF card. Do not remove the memory card during this writing process. To view a picture, press the playback button, then use the multi-selector button to step through the images stored on your memory card. To delete an image that is being displayed on the LCD, press the delete button. Confirm that you want to delete the image. Practice viewing the picture on your LCD each time you take a picture, and remember, with digital cameras there's no film expense, so take as many pictures as you want and simply delete the images that don't turn out. Note, when your control panel displays full, your memory card is full and will not hold any more pictures. Either insert another memory card or copy the images off of the existing memory card onto your PC before again reformatting and reusing the card. To conserve your battery, the camera will automatically hibernate within about a minute if you haven't pressed any buttons during that time. Just press the shutter to awaken it again. Now that you've learned how to shoot and play back pictures using one programmed auto configuration, let's take a look at some of my favorite options and variations that can be selected using the menu system. Most shooting, playback, and setup options of the camera can be selected in the menu. While making selections by pressing buttons and rotating dials on the camera may be faster, some people prefer using the menu system so that they can view the large LCD monitor on the camera. Before we begin, realize that you can navigate the entire menu system by using the multi-selection button. Pressing up or down takes you to different options. Pressing right takes you further into a menu selection. Pressing left takes you back to the previous submenus. Pressing the multi-selection button is the same as pressing the Enter button. It enters or selects your choice. That being said, you can start the menu system by pressing the menu button. Then press the down arrow on the multi-select button to choose from the various sub-menu categories, including playback, shooting, custom settings, setup menu, and current settings. Let's look at the playback menu. I suggest that you go to the display mode and select several of these items, including the histogram setting. Until you have enabled these items, you cannot get at this information later. Another item in the playback menu that I like to enable is the image review. While this drains your battery faster, it allows you to view each image automatically each time you shoot. A tip: after this is selected, and when viewing an image on the LCD monitor, press the shutter halfway down to make the image go away. In the shooting menu, I like to adjust the Optimize Image settings depending on what I am taking pictures of. I also like to adjust the color space setting to Adobe, because this setting retains more color in the images, and because I tend to like editing each photo that I shoot in Adobe Photoshop. While the shooting menu must be used for some things, such as fine-tuning the image quality or the white balance, I tend to prefer doing as many of these activities as possible using controls and displays on the camera body itself. You may prefer making these adjustments on the LCD screen. The custom settings include abundant items for customizing how your focus, metering, bracketing, and other mode selections will operate. Nikon has really provided an amazing array of options throughout its menus. You may want to visit the Setup menu Video mode. Mine was set to PAL, which will not allow my photos to display from the camera onto my North American TV. Switch the mode to NTSC if you live in North America or another NTSC region. I also really like the battery info under the Setup menu. It shows me the specific percentage of battery life that is remaining. When the Help icon is displayed on the LCD monitor, you can request help on the highlighted item by pressing the Help button. This is a great way to learn the definition of menu items, especially some of the specific custom setting menu items. For more discussion on the menus, please see our advanced DVD. Shooting modes determine how a camera takes photographs. One at a time, single. 1 to 4 per second in continuous low mode, customizable in the menu. 5 frames per second, which makes the D200 one of the fastest 10 megapixel cameras on the planet using continuous high mode. Self-timer operated in the shooting mode but customizable between 2, 5, 10, and 20 seconds in the menu. And mirror lockup, used to reduce camera shake when taking critical shots. To activate the mirror lockup, press the shutter once to lock it up and a second time to take the picture. Your camera is capable of storing images in 2 file types, RAW or uncompressed NEF files, and JPEG, which is a compressed file format. The RAW file keeps more of the image data and is therefore a better quality image file. It can be edited with popular software packages like Adobe Photoshop. Here's a tip. If you have plenty of memory space available, or if you plan to manipulate your photos, including their white balance, in Photoshop, you'll want to shoot photos in RAW format. JPEG is a compressed file format. It retains a good degree of quality and can be edited to a lesser degree with photo manipulation software also. Use this format if you have less space or don't expect to do a lot of touching up of your photos. A tip: JPEG images will degrade over time if you repeatedly open and resave them on your PC. The number of photos that you can fit on a 1 GB memory card, for NEF about 60, small or basic JPEG images 1,500. I prefer to shoot NEF and small basic JPEG images simultaneously. That way I can immediately email a picture to someone if need be, but I can also retain the ability to work with it in Photoshop. Or simply convert the image to a large JPEG for burning to a CD and printing at a professional photo finishing lab later. To select from your full range of image quality options, you must use the Menu System Shooting submenu. For a more limited number of options, simply press and hold down the Qual button and then rotate the main command dial. Another tip, a very cool feature: NEF files can be compressed 40% to 50% with very little drop in quality. This can save you a lot of space while still giving you image manipulation options later. This must be selected in the shooting menu under the RAW compression option. You'll want to get into the habit of protecting your great photos on your camera from accidentally being erased. To do this, simply press the play button, then the left or right points on the multi-selector, and when you find the photo you want protected, press the protect button. Something called the ISO setting of your camera also relates to image exposure. The ISO setting is a way to control the sensitivity of your image sensor chip. You can think of this like ASA ratings of film, 100, 400, and so on. The higher the number, the less light that is required to properly expose the image sensor. To set the ISO, simply press the ISO button. Then move the main dial until you find the setting you want. Another tip, keep in mind that the higher the ISO setting, the more noise or digital grain you will introduce into your images. In other words, a high ISO setting can make the image look lousy, full of artifacts or particles. An important part of taking a good photo is to study the color of surrounding light and tell your camera what color that light is. This communication to the camera about the color of light is called setting the white balance. But first, a bit about the color of light. Well, all light looks white to an untrained eye. Each type of light, sunlight at daytime, sunlight in the shade or under cloudy conditions, light coming from a tungsten lamp or fluorescent fixture, are all composed of different colors. If your camera thinks that you're photographing in daylight, but you are photographing in a setting that uses tungsten light, your image will look overly red. Well, all light looks white to an untrained eye. Setting your white balance, or telling your camera what the color of white light is, will help your pictures have a proper coloring. Your camera will attempt to automatically determine the white balance when you select the auto white balance mode. But you can get better results by setting a preset white balance or by manually customizing your white balance, which can provide some of the very best results. Here is how you select a preset white balance. Hold down the WB button and rotate the main command dial until you've displayed the white balance icon that you want to select. Your flash will usually be a bit blue in color, more so than daylight, so set your white balance mode to flash when using the flash for great frontal lighting that is also compatible with the background's lighting and color temperatures. Here's how you manually preset a white balance by actually measuring the color of a white or gray piece of paper. Press the WB button and rotate the main command dial to the PRE selection. Release and press the WB button again and rotate the sub-command dial till the preset D0 is showing in the upper portion of the control panel. Release and again press the WB button, holding it in until the PRE selection flashes. Frame the gray or white paper so that it fills the viewfinder, and while the PRE selection is still flashing, depress the shutter. No picture will be taken, but if the custom white balance was successfully measured, good will flash in the control panel. Otherwise, no good will flash and you must repeat steps 4 and 5 again. Other white balance features, including white balance bracketing, are covered in our advanced DVD. There are several other advanced features of your camera that we will only preview now, but we'll discuss in greater detail in our advanced DVD. The first advanced features that we'll preview are the autofocus or focus modes. By selecting a focus mode, you can determine how your camera will focus. There are 3 modes to choose from: single servo AF, continuous servo AF, and manual focus. Single servo AF. This mode should be used when you are photographing a stationary subject. As long as the shutter is depressed halfway, your focus will stay fixed on whichever focus point was selected. Keep in mind that the focus lock feature only works in this AF mode, which is sometimes a good reason alone to select this focus mode. Continuous servo AF is the best mode to select, however, if you are taking pictures of moving objects. While the shutter is halfway depressed, continuous servo AF mode will continually track a moving object using multiple focus points if necessary, continually predicting and changing the focus as necessary. so that at any time you may take one or more shots. Manual mode, focus must be achieved manually by moving the focus ring. Notice that when all focus points are selected, the default setting, the camera determines which focus point or points that it will use. To ensure that the right focus area achieves focus, you may manually determine which focus area the camera should use. To do this, move the Secure Focus lock to the open position. Then use the multi-selector to select a desired focus point. To reset the focus point to the center point, you can simply press the multi-selector. The AF area mode determines how the focus point is selected by the camera. Single area AF. You select the focus point as previously discussed, and the camera focuses only on that point. Dynamic area AF. You select the focus point, but if the subject moves, the camera refocuses using other focus points. Use with continuous servo AF to photograph subjects that will move. Group Dynamic AF. You select the focus point, but if the subject moves, the camera refocuses using only other focus points grouped close to the point that you previously selected. Use this with continuous servo AF to photograph subjects that will move only within a known region of the viewfinder. Dynamic area closest subject priority. The camera basically focuses on the subject closest to the camera. To stay in autofocus mode but gain a bit more control, you may find it helpful to lock your focus on a certain point before recomposing and taking the picture. To do this, with the focus switch on the lens set to MA for autofocus, simply press the shutter halfway down until the focus light and the point appear. Then, still holding the shutter halfway down, move the camera to recompose the picture and then depress the shutter the rest of the way down. Depending on the focus mode that you are using, you may need to press the Auto Exposure Autofocus Lock button to lock the focus as well. Once the focus is locked, recompose your picture, then press the shutter to take the picture. A tip: even if continuous servo AF mode is selected, as long as the AE/AF lock button is depressed, the camera will lock the initial focus. The exposure metering modes determine how the camera sets exposure. There are 3 modes. Color Matrix 2. This looks at the entire image within the frame to determine proper exposure. This works best with CPU lenses. 3D Color Matrix 2 metering is used. This is a sophisticated overall metering system. Center weighted metering. In this mode, the camera looks at the entire frame's needs, but mostly weighs the center portion of the frame to make its final determination. Spot meter. This looks at the center 2% of the frame to determine exposure needs at that precise point. This is great for determining exposure differences between different parts of the subject or scene. Before we discuss the exposure modes of the D200, we'll review some basics of exposure in case that added context might be helpful. Let's start with an analogy. Consider the proper amount of light or exposure to be like a full bucket of water. Then consider a water tap from which you will fill the bucket to be the aperture or opening on your lens. Finally, consider your camera's shutter speed to be like the amount of time you will leave the water tap turned on. The more the tap is open, the more water will come through the hose into the bucket, and hence the shorter amount of time you will need the tap to be open. Conversely, if the tap will only open a small amount and water is only trickling into the bucket, you'll need to leave the water turned on for a much longer period of time. An interesting and important note is that shutter speed not only affects exposure, but it also affects clarity during action. A fast shutter speed will freeze a moving subject in your picture, whereas a slow shutter speed will appear to blur a moving object. Fast shutter speeds are therefore useful for taking pictures of sporting events. Slow shutter speeds are useful for taking pictures of waterfalls or car lights at night, giving a very interesting image. Just as important to understand are the secondary effects of aperture. A small aperture not only lets less light reach the image sensor, tending to make a darker exposure, but it also makes the entire scene from near to far appear more sharp or in focus. This optical phenomenon is called a long depth of field. This is useful when photographing a subject in front of a national monument where you want both in focus. A large aperture has the opposite effect. Only the subject of focus will be in focus. This is used extensively in portrait photography as it helps to literally focus attention on the subject. Let's look briefly at one more photographic concept: aperture and shutter stop. Both shutter speeds and apertures have a standard series of settings called stops. Opening the aperture by one stop will double the light that reaches the sensor. Similarly, speeding the shutter by one stop will half the light that reaches the sensor. Therefore, by opening the aperture one stop and speeding the shutter by one stop, the exposure is kept constant. By opening the aperture 2 or 3 stops and speeding the shutter 2 or 3 will have the same effect on exposure. It will not change. Thus, the amount of light that reaches the sensor will remain constant. Your pictures will be just as light or dark as they were before. What does change? The depth of field and the subject's motion, frozen or blurred. Exposure modes will determine how the camera sets shutter and aperture to determine a proper exposure. The exposure mode, programmed auto, is a fully automatic mode. It will calculate a proper exposure for you, but it will also allow you to easily rotate through and select different aperture shutter speed combinations to emphasize either depth of field or motion in your shot. To operate in this mode, press the Exposure Mode button while rotating the main command dial until you see the P appear. Simply rotate the main command dial alone to view different shutter speed aperture combinations that maintain a constant exposure but differing depths of field. Press the shutter all of the way down to take the picture. Again, if exposure is too high, a high symbol will show in the viewfinder. Use a neutral density filter to reduce the amount of light. Again, if exposure is too low, a low symbol will show in the viewfinder. Use the flash or higher ISO setting to increase the amount of light. Use the shutter priority auto mode for greater control over freezing or blurring motion. You select the shutter speed and the camera will select the appropriate aperture for proper exposure. To operate in this mode, press the exposure mode button while rotating the main command dial until you see the S appear. Simply rotate the main command dial alone to view different shutter speeds. Another tip, remember that you can change the ISO setting to make the image sensor less or more sensitive and provide you with a different range of shutter speed options. Use the aperture priority auto mode to give yourself greater control over depth of field. Use this to set the aperture setting yourself and let the camera calculate the shutter speed needed to make proper exposure. To operate in this mode, press the exposure mode button while rotating the main command dial until you see the A appear. And rotate the sub-command dial alone to view different apertures. To view the depth of field before taking the picture, simply press the depth of field button. Before we discuss the final exposure mode, let's take a look at some other features that allow you to adjust the exposure, but only with the previously determined settings, P, S, and A. The first feature is the auto exposure lock. This is useful when you want to point to and specify the part of your image that you want to be properly exposed and in focus, even when you later move your camera slightly to recompose your shot. To use the auto exposure focus lock feature of your camera, aim the camera so as to center in your viewfinder the portion of the image that you want to be properly exposed. It allows you to set a meter reading on your main subject by either pressing the shutter halfway down or by pressing the AF on button. Once the focus indicator glows green, press the auto exposure focus lock button. Both focus and exposure are now locked to the reading that you had made on the subject. Keep the AF/AE lock button depressed until you take the picture. Recompose your picture by zooming out or moving the camera one direction or other. Now press the shutter button the rest of the way to take the picture. A tip: use auto exposure lock with center weighted or spot metering modes to get the best effect. By using a plus exposure compensation, the subject will get a bit brighter. By using a minus, it will get a bit darker. To use the exposure compensation feature of your camera, press the exposure compensation button. Move the main control dial to add or subtract exposure stops. Now press the shutter button the rest of the way to take a picture. Another tip, reset the exposure compensation to 0 when you're done. Otherwise, it will remain in effect even if you've powered your camera off and back on again. Similarly, by pressing the flash exposure compensation button, and turning the subdial menu, the flash can be manipulated to slightly over or underexpose the subject with its light. Again, both AE lock and exposure compensation are features that can only be used when you have selected either the P, S, or A modes. The final exposure mode is the M or manual mode. Use the manual mode to get complete control over both shutter speed and aperture. You select the aperture and the shutter speed, and the camera will show you what the meter reading looks like. To operate in this mode, press the exposure mode button while rotating the main command dial until you see the M appear. After that, rotate the main command dial to change the shutter speed and rotate the sub-command dial to change the aperture. Move either the shutter speed or aperture until the exposure scale indicates that you are on 0 or dead center position. Press the shutter and take the picture. A tip, if the exposure scale indicator is on -1 or 2, your exposure is 1 or 2 stops darker than expected proper exposure. If the exposure scale indicator shows a +1 or 2, your exposure is 1 or 2 stops lighter than expected proper exposure. You cannot use either exposure compensation or auto exposure lock when using the manual mode of your camera. The last advanced feature we'll preview in this DVD is exposure bracketing. Exposure bracketing allows you to take one photo at the proper exposure, one or more at higher exposures, and one or more again at lower exposures, thus ensuring that you will have at least one properly exposed shot. This works with or without the flash being operated, depending on your menu custom settings, auto bracketing settings. To execute bracketing with or without the flash operating, hold down the bracketing button and then rotate the main command dial to select the number of bracketed shots. Then hold down the bracketing button and rotate the sub-command dial to determine the exposure increments. If you select a continuous shooting mode with bracketing, you need only to press the shutter once to have all shots fired off simultaneously. Otherwise, simply press the shutter button as many times as necessary to complete the total bracketed shots. This feature is used extensively by many pros to overcome the most noticeable downside of using a digital camera. Namely, lighter and darker areas of digital photos capture a markedly smaller amount of detail than film. By bracketing a shot and opening all three exposure versions in Photoshop, people can combine the shots, erasing all but the best detailed exposed versions of each shot. The final product is a much more detailed photo. White balance may also be bracketed in a similar manner by selecting it in the menu Custom Settings Auto Bracketing Settings. Consider using the built-in flash for portrait photography. Your camera comes with several flash sync modes to help you get just the right effect. Front curtain sync for most situations. Red eye reduction pre-flashes for about 1 second in order to contract the subject's pupils, thus reducing the infamous red eye effect. Red eye slow sync combines benefits of red eye reduction with slow shutter speed, resulting in a properly exposed background at night, while the subject is still properly exposed by flash without red eye. Use this mode with a tripod or monopod. Use only with programmed auto or aperture priority exposure modes. There are other flash sync modes that will be discussed in the advanced DVD. To begin using the flash, select either the matrix or center weighted metering mode. Then manually open it by pressing the flash pop-up button. Then to press the flash sync mode button, while rotating the main command dial to select a desired flash mode. Not only can you play back images, seeing them in the 2.5-inch LCD screen, but you can also zoom in and enlarge them to see finer detail. Besides checking the LCD and actually viewing the image after it's taken, you can check the exposure by simply looking at the image's histogram graph. A histogram is a graph of all the highlights and shadows of your photo. It represents the range of brightness from shadows on the left to highlights on the right of a horizontal axis. Midtones are shown in the center. On the vertical axis, the magnitude from 0 to 255 of brightness is displayed. The higher the vertical line at any point along the horizontal axis, the greater the number of pixels that the image sensor captured in that range of shadows, midtone, or highlights. A histogram of a photo showing only a lot of pixels in the shadows range on the left side of the graph represents a picture that is mostly dark. And similarly, a histogram of a photo showing only a lot of pixels in the highlights range on the right side of the graph represents a picture that is mostly light. A well-exposed picture is typically one that has a fairly even distribution of pixels across the entire histogram. To see the histogram of an image, press the play button to review photos. Scroll to the photo whose histogram you want to see by pressing the left or right points on the multi-selector button. Then press the up or down points to scroll to the histogram of that image. Press the play or shutter button halfway down to return to normal play or camera mode. Clearly, proper exposure is a major part of taking good pictures, and by changing the aperture and shutter speed, either with the automatic or manual settings, you can change the depth of field or the motion blur or sharpness while still keeping the exposure you want. The second most important principle of taking great pictures is image sharpness. Image sharpness is affected by several things, including lens focus, depth of field, camera shake, and digital noise. First of all, you may want to have a bit of motion blur in your image for aesthetic effect. In this case, you would experiment with a slower shutter speed. You may also want parts of your image to be sharp and other parts to be out of focus. For this, you would experiment with depth of field changes, as already discussed. This section will talk about how to keep your image sharp when you intend it to be sharp. Let's talk about lens focus. Sometimes the autofocus feature of your camera will have problems, particularly in situations where there is low contrast, highly reflective or bright objects and backgrounds, or overlapping objects at different distances. To ensure that the right part of your subject is in focus, you may want to switch the focus mode selector on the side of your camera to M for manual focusing mode, where you will have full control over focus by simply moving the focus ring left or right. Note, even in manual focus mode, you can press the shutter button halfway down and the focus indicator will glow to indicate that you are in focus. Another way to get a clear picture is to increase your depth of field, as we've already discussed, to cover the entire range of what you're trying to get in focus. That way, even if your lens focus is a bit off, you may still have a crystal clear image recorded by the sensor. Another cause of poor focus is camera shake, that is, movement of the camera while the shutter is open, exposing the image sensor. Always steady the camera when you can. Holding the camera with two hands and pressing the viewfinder gently against your face will help. Lean against something if you can, and where possible, use a tripod, monopod, or even a bean bag to rest your camera on. You can also reduce camera shake by selecting a fast shutter speed. This keeps the image sensor from being exposed to shaking conditions more briefly. One general rule of thumb that you may find helpful is the rule of 1 over the focal length. For example, if your lens focal length is 300 millimeters, set your shutter speed to at least 1/300th of a second. If your focal length or zoom is set to 30 millimeter, you may get by with a shutter speed as low as 1/30th of a second or so. Nikon's image stabilizer lenses do a remarkable job of taking out camera shake automatically. Digital grain or noise makes the image appear poor or out of focus. Don't enlarge an image too much, and if you know that you must enlarge an image, select a large file format as possible. Saving images in JPEG compression format creates some noise in the image. Also, repeatedly opening and resaving JPEG images can degrade the file quality. Save images in RAW format if possible. This is not compressed like JPEG. Too high of an ISO setting can create noise in your image. Underexposing your photos, too much black, will come across as gray or noisy. Don't underexpose your photos. Another way to keep noise out of your image is to shoot high-contrast subjects. Gradual gradations, like the sky's changing blue colors, cause grain-like patterns in the image. Finally, to help keep noise out of your images, allow your camera to cool off before shooting more pictures. An overheated image sensor will add noise to your image. You can measure light by using your camera's light meter in manual mode. This will weigh most heavily the center portion of your image. By using a long focal length lens or zoom lens in telephoto position and measuring the light on each part of your photo frame or subject, you can get a sense for how bright or dark the various areas are. If an area is too bright, it will be clipped by the image sensor and appear completely white. If an area is too dark, it will appear grayish and full of noise. When light shines directly onto your subject from a bright lamp or other source, it can create stark contrast and pronounced shadows. Usually, it's more flattering to your subject to shoot under cloud cover, in the shade, or with reflected or diffused light, such as when light reflects off an umbrella or shines through silk. The direction of the light will impact the end result. Study and experiment with placing your subject or bouncing or reflecting light so as to achieve the look that you're after. By shining a bit more light on one side of an object than another, you can create an illusion of 3 dimension, which is important for good 2-dimensional images. The greater the contrast between the light and dark portions, the more dramatic your photo will be. As discussed previously, a great photo will show a full range of light from highlight to shadows as shown in the histogram of that image. Direct your subjects and light your scene if possible until you can achieve a great balance of highlights, midtones, and shadows in your picture. Use backlight to create silhouettes when desirable. Use either auto exposure compensation in any creative mode or the manual mode to achieve this. The next most important elements of good photography are angle of view and magnification. Obviously, by moving around or moving your subject around, you can shoot from slightly above, below, and side to side, and closer or farther away to achieve just the right look. Close-ups are great, and you want to include the eyes, well lit. Sometimes a full body shot or shot from even farther back can better help establish your location and situation, which may be what you want. Practice moving your viewing angle to get some really great shots. The lens that you shoot with will also affect the general look of your picture and may be more practical and convenient to use than actually moving closer to or farther away from your subject. A telephoto lens will make things appear closer. This is said to have a long focal length. A common focal length for great portrait photography is about 100 millimeters. A normal lens is considered to be about what the human eye sees, something between 40 and 50 millimeters. This is said to have a normal focal length. A wide-angle lens will make things appear farther away and will also distort the image in some interesting and fun ways. This is called a short focal length. A zoom lens is very common and can move from one focal length to another by simply moving the dial. A great advantage of a digital SLR is that you can attach different lenses depending on the circumstances. There are dozens of Nikon lenses to choose from. While you can use all of these lenses with your digital SLR, you need to understand that the lenses will be magnified by a factor of 1.6 times compared to your 35mm film SLR. The reason is that the image sensor is smaller than the 35mm film frame, so the sensor sees only the inner portion of what might be seen on 35mm. The result is great for telephoto lens use. Your 200mm telephoto lens will now function as a 320mm lens with your camera. The problem is using wide-angle lenses. A 35mm wide-angle lens will show images at 55mm, slightly larger than normal focal length, and an 18mm lens will show images at 28mm, still wide, but not nearly as wide in perspective. So before you go buying a 100mm lens for portrait photography and a 50mm lens for normal picture taking, consider that your lens selection will be multiplied by 1.6 times in appearance with your camera. The final elements of a great photograph are composition and design. The placement of objects and the location within the frame is critical to make a photograph look finished and artistic. While one person's perception of art is different from another's, here are some general principles you'll want to consider. Showcase the main subject. You can make the subject stand out either by lighting, placement, focus, or background-foreground elements. Practice seeing what these different principles can do for your photos. Again, keep in mind that digital cameras have no film operating costs, so take lots of pictures and do a lot of experimenting. Consider your orientation. Do you want a vertical or horizontal image, commonly called portrait versus landscape perspectives? Some subjects just work better as vertical, some as horizontal. It depends on the mood and purpose of your photo. Placing the horizon. The horizon is where the sky meets the land. Typically, a great photo will show the most important subjects in the upper portion of the frame, where the eyes naturally want to look. But sometimes the picture works best to divide the picture horizontally by the horizon and showing it higher or lower than center frame depending on the subject matter. Placing your subject or subjects off of center can sometimes create a more pleasing image. The rule of thirds advocates dividing your viewfinder into thirds, both horizontally and vertically, and then placing your most important subjects on one or more of the cross points. You'll notice that the eye lines for close-ups are often aligned with the top line. Remember to lock your focus and exposure to achieve the kind of balanced composition that you want. Simplify your picture and background. A great photo is often simple. It requires patience to get just the right shot sometimes. To direct the viewer's eyes and to make a picture interesting to look at, notice the lines, shapes, and textures of your subject and apply composition principles in a way that will accentuate these things. Sometimes a great picture is waiting for you in the patterns and repetitions of daily life that are often unobserved. By showing the scale of subjects in frame, you can make a photo more informative and even awe-inspiring. And finally, use foreground objects as natural frames to enclose and give contrast to your primary subject. We hope that you've enjoyed the first of our 2 DVDs on the Nikon D200. And we hope that you'll purchase our advanced DVD where you can learn more cool tips and tricks about your Nikon D200. It will also discuss digital workflow issues, how to manipulate your photo images using Adobe Photoshop, and ways to archive your photos, such as burning them to CD. You will also learn to enjoy and share your photos in new ways by creating video photo montage DVDs.